Hey everyone, Forrest here with Rocky Mountain School of Photography, and today we are going to do an advanced setup guide on the new UGREEN NASync line of NASs. I do want to point out that this video was sponsored by Ugreen. They did reach out to ask for me to make a second video, and I leaped at the opportunity because I really wanted to dive in a little bit deeper on these NASs and how to set them up with more advanced settings. I also want to say that if you are ordering your NAS before May 9th, you can save 35% off, and there is a link down in the description to learn more. If you're going into this video, I'm going to assume that you've fully set up the drive, you've created a storage pool, you've created an admin user account, and you've done all of the stuff that we've previously talked about, and you're familiar accessing the NAS both through your web browser as well as through your file browser like Finder or Windows Explorer. In this video, we're going to be featuring the UGREEN NASync DXP6800 Pro, which is a 6-bay monster NAS that right now is set up with 20 terabytes of redundant storage, and I'm really excited to show you guys some of the advanced stuff that we can do with this thing. The first thing I want to talk a little bit about is SSD caching. Now, this is a feature that is available on some of the UGREEN NASync lineup, and what it allows us to do is install M.2 NVMe SSD drives into the NAS to work as basically a temporary place to write data to quickly, while then the spinning drives will move the data from the M.2 SSDs onto the spinning SATA hard drives. And what this can do in theory is speed up our transfer speeds. It doesn't make us rely as much on the speed of a traditional spinning hard drive. Instead, we can really leverage the speed of a much faster SSD. What I've done is installed two 1 terabyte Samsung 990 Pros into this NAS, and we can set those two drives up as an SSD cache. To do this, I'm going to pop into Storage Manager. I'm going to go to Storage Management, and I'm just going to show you guys that if I do go to Hard Disk Management, we can see I have two M.2 hard disks here that are currently marked as not used. In order to set them up in the Storage Management section, I'm going to go to the ... on Storage Pool 1, and I'm going to go to SSD Cache Management. Now again, like I said, if you're wondering what the heck a storage pool is, check out my previous video because I walked through how to set one of these up. In this case, I'm going to grab SSD Cache Management, we're going to click on Create, and we're going to apply the SSD cache to Volume 1. And we're going to create a read-write cache. Do note that 2 SSDs are required for a read-write cache, whereas only 1 is required for a read-only cache. So I'm going to go ahead and do a read-write cache. We're going to click Next. It is going to tell us that the data on the SSD drives is going to be wiped. I'm okay with that. Go ahead and confirm. And it's going to ask me what RAID type I want to use. I'm going to go with RAID 1, and we're going to check both SSDs. Now, RAID 1 means that what happens on one of these SSDs also happens on the other one, which I really like because it means if I drop a bunch of files onto this NAS and they are put on the cache temporarily, they are going to be backed up until the time that they are written onto the 6 spinning hard drives. I like that. Again, I want redundancy through my entire process. Again, we talked about this last video, but I've actually configured this NAS in RAID 5, which means I can handle 1 disk failure. And this means if I set my SSD cache up in RAID 1, while the data's on the cache, also I can handle 1 disk failure, which I really like. So I'm going to check both these drives, click Next here. It's going to ask how much capacity I want to use. I'm going to use the 600 gigabytes. And we'll say Next. And it's going to give us a little preview here of what it's going to do. Total cache capacity, available data in Volume 1. All right, we're going to go ahead and apply. And it's going to say, hey, it's going to delete all data. We're going to go ahead and do that. Type my password and click Confirm. And what this has now done, if I go to my 3 little dots here and I go to SSD Cache Management, we can see that there is an active SSD cache in use in this system. So after enabling the SSD caching, I now have a 10 gigabit connection connected between my computer and the NAS, and I want to run a quick speed test using LAN speed test. I don't think I really have the knowledge and the know-how to run the best speed tests out there. I'll leave most of that to the other YouTubers out there in the world. But I do want to show you guys that with SSD caching and a 10 gigabit connection to the NAS, when I run this test, I'm consistently getting between about 800 and 900 megabytes per second and about 542 megabytes per second in read speed. So my write speed's been a little bit higher than my read speed as I've run this test. Now, I do want to point out this is megabytes per second, which if we convert to gigabits, we're at about 6-7 gigabits per second. So we're almost getting to 60-70% of what a true 10 gigabit connection is capable of. I do think though that as the software and firmware of this NAS and all of the Ugreen NASs improves over time, we will get closer to that full 10 gigabit saturation of the connection type. I will say also some Ugreen NASs can use link aggregation, where you use both ports on the back of the NAS to act as one, which would get you up to 20 gigabit, assuming you had a way to connect your computer to the network also via 20 gigabit. But it would be cool to see that, and especially with SSD caching, that enables those incredibly high speeds. Finally, I want to say that over a standard gigabit connection, I didn't see any improvement in speeds with SSD caching. Gigabit is the bottleneck there, not the speed of the hard drives. So I really wouldn't worry about SSD caching if you're not going to use a 10 gigabit connection type. Over gigabit, I was able to get about 110 megabytes per second in write speed and read speed. I also just kind of want to finally say, if we're talking 0.8 gigabytes per second or 835 megabytes per second, that's insanely fast. And that's redundant storage. It's amazing. If you've never used a NAS before, it's pretty darn cool. This is better than SSD level speeds, except you're getting redundancy. You're getting, in some cases, connecting to it from, hundreds of feet away if your NAS doesn't live right next to you. This is a lot of cool stuff here. One other thing to note is that the two M.2 SSD drive bays can also just be used to create a second storage pool of faster storage. So if you want one storage pool to be the spinning drives, one storage pool to be the SSDs, that is also super possible. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is link bonding and network bridging. Now, these are two really interesting things that I think are worth bringing up when configuring the network settings on the NAS. I'm going to pop into Control Panel and then Network, and inside of Network, I'm going to go to Network Connection. And in here we can see that right now I have one cable connected to this NAS, and it is connected to my network at the 1 gigabit per second speed. And this, I think, is what a lot of people are going to use these NASs for. They're not going to maybe invest in a 10 gigabit connection. We're just going to be using standard gigabit. One nice thing, however, is if your router supports it, or if your switch supports it, you can aggregate these two LAN connections or local area network connections into one. Here at school, we use Ubiquiti's Unify series of networking equipment, and I was able to aggregate the two 10 gigabit connections to act as one 20 gigabit connection from the NAS to our switch. And as the speeds of these NASs through software and firmware improvements increase, I think the taking advantage of a 20 gigabit connection is definitely a possibility, especially if you're utilizing an SSD cache. The other thing that I want to mention, which I think is more exciting for a lot of people, is the network bridging option. In my previous video, I laid out that if you wanted to take advantage of the 10 gigabit connection that this NAS has to offer, and you don't have a 10 gigabit capable switch, you need to buy one. And that's actually not the case. They've added a 10 gigabit capable network bridging mode with this NAS. I'm not sure if the smaller 4800 or other smaller NASs have it, but the 6800 Pro does. And what this means is we can utilize the two network ports on the back of the NAS to send one of them into your computer via 10 gigabit to enable a 10 gigabit connection between computer and NAS. And the second one can plug into your router, connecting your computer, your NAS, to the larger internet and network at your house. And this is really cool. So all we have to do to set this up is in the network connection configuration, I'm going to go to Manage, and I'm going to turn on network bridging. Now, what worked best for me was to put a checkbox here next to network bridging, check both LAN 1 and LAN 2, and click the apply button. Once that's done configuring, we can see that now the network connection says BR LAN 1 or Bridge LAN 1, and everything seems to be working normally. However, right now I'm just connected to the internet through Wi-Fi. I don't have a special network connection to this NAS. So what I'm going to do, like I said, I have one cable going out of the back of the NAS and into my router. I'm going to take the other port out of the back of the NAS. I'm going to plug it into a 10 gigabit adapter. This is one from Otherworld Computing. I will leave a link down in the description. I'm going to go ahead and use this 10 gigabit adapter into my computer. basically to give my computer 10 gigabit ability. If you have 10 gigabit built into your computer, you don't have to do this. And then I'm going to plug that Ethernet cable out of the 10 gigabit adapter into the second port in the back of the NAS. So the NAS is essentially acting as our network switch. It's connecting the computer to it as well as to the router and the internet and network at large. You'll notice that as soon as I do this, it now says network status 10 gigabits. It has identified that there is a 10 gigabit connection between my computer and the NAS. You all, this is huge. This means that if you want to enable 10 gigabit connection to your NAS, the only thing that you need to buy, assuming the NAS has a 10 gigabit port, you're buying one of the nicer Ugreen NASs, is just a very simple 10 gigabit adapter for your computer. Or if you have something like a Mac Studio, you already have 10 gigabit built in. Again, one cable from the computer into the NAS, the other cable from the NAS into the router, since the NAS has 2 network ports. Once I do that, I was able to get full 10 gigabit per second. Even if I turned off my Wi-Fi, I was still able to keep my connection to the NAS and to the internet. Pretty cool stuff. So network bridging, I highly recommend for those of you who want to get 10 gigabit out of the system without worrying about buying a 10 gigabit capable switch. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is multiple user access and controlling who can use what folders on your NAS. So the first thing we need to do is go into File Manager and talk a little bit about shared folders. By default, when you make an account, your account that you create when setting up your NAS has full administrative privileges. This means that any future folders that you create on the NAS, your default account will automatically have access to those files. You can, however, set up folders that are limited to only specific users. So as an example, let's say that I'm a photographer and I hire an assistant, and I want my assistant to have access to some of my photos, but not all of my photos. What I can do is go ahead and create a brand new shared folder. And I'm going to call this something like Assistant Access. I'm going to put it on volume 1. I could also set a storage limit if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to hide it. Just keep it super simple, Assistant Access. I'm going to go ahead and create that folder. And you'll notice that by default, it shows my user account and it's giving me full read-write permissions. By default, again, the admin user will always have read-write permissions. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And that's going to make this new folder called Assistant Access here that I can put files in. Now, me personally, I, again, am an admin, so I can add things, I can remove things. If I access my NAS through Finder or Windows Explorer, I'm going to have full read-write permissions to every shared folder on my system. Let's make a new shared folder and let's call it My Files. And this is going to be the stuff for me that I don't necessarily want my assistant to have access to. Again, I'm going to put it on volume 1, no storage limit. I'm going to go ahead and create it, and it's going to ask me whether I want to give myself read-write permissions, and again, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, I will point out there's also an option here that says hide subfolders and files from users who do not have permission. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. That means that anything inside of this folder will essentially be invisible to anyone who's not signed in with administrative privileges. So I'm going to click OK on that. We're going to get a new folder called My Files. Now, do note that any of this stuff is changeable after the fact. We can go in and change the permissions of any folder after we create it. So if you forget to do this, you can go and do it later. And once this is set, now I'm going to go into my control panel and I'm going to go to User Management and I'm going to make a new user. So let me go ahead and create a user. Username, I'm going to say Assistant. Password, I'm just going to do Assistant123. Oh, we have to have lowercase and uppercase, okay. Okay, so we'll give a nice password. There we go. I'm not going to do an email address or a description, but I'm going to set the role to a common user, and I'm going to skip user group and all of that. I'm also not going to enable a personal folder. That's a folder that they would have access to. We don't need that. And this user is not allowed to change the password. I'm going to let them change the password if they want to. So I'm going to go ahead and create this user account. Now here's the cool thing. Now we can control read-write permissions for each folder. So my files, I don't want to give my assistants access to that at all. So I'm going to say access denied, and the assistant access, I'm going to give read-write permissions. So now at a user level, I can adjust what this user is able to do. I'm going to go ahead and click done. And now we've got multiple users with multiple permissions. Now what this means is when someone does go to access the NAS, and say they're doing it through Windows Explorer or Finder on a Mac, and they go to Go on a Mac and connect to server, when it asks them to sign in, so when they go to, in this case, 10.0.11.6, or the name of the NAS like we looked at in the last video, when it asks them what they want to sign in as, I'm already signed in as the administrator. So I'm going to be able to access either one of these folders. If I go to my files, we can see, oh, there I am in my files. It works great. But if I was signed in with the assistant user account, it would not let me see what was inside of this shared folder. And that's really one of the main powers of a NAS, is that you can share files, share folders with other people, but it gives you full access control over who can see and who can interact with what. I should also say that all of these permissions apply as well to the web version of the NAS too. So if someone's accessing through their web browser and they're signed in with the assistant account or whatever account you've created with limited privileges, they're only going to be able to see and interact with whatever you give them permission to do. Next, I want to talk a little bit about remote access for your NAS and how you can access it away from your local network. Now, there's a few ways to do this. The most advanced way would be to set up a VPN and VPN into your network remotely and access that way. And that's a fine way to do it, but that requires a lot of setup, some specialized hardware in some cases, and that's not going to be the topic of this video. Instead, I'm going to focus on using the built-in Ugreen tool to remotely access your NAS. So on my NAS here, I'm going to head into Control Panel, and I'm going to go to Device Connection. And you'll notice inside of Device Connection, there is a Remote Access button. And what I want everybody to do, if you want to do this, is enable Ugreen Link Service. Now, this is going to ask you to log in with your Ugreen account. And if you haven't made one, you're going to have to step through their little process of creating an account. It's fairly simple. You make a new account, and that is going to link this NAS with your Ugreen account. Now, I want to point something very important out. As soon as you turn this on, you are opening your NAS up to anyone with your Ugreen username and password to access it. Now, I don't mean your admin username and password, like in user management, when we talked about multiple user access and how you have your administrator username and password. In my case, my administrator username is Forrest C. I'm talking about once you do this in device connection and remote access, you're going to be asked to make a Ugreen Link account. That account is going to be your email address and a password that you choose. I highly recommend creating a really good password, enabling two-factor authentication if two-factor authentication is available, putting every layer of security into that Ugreen account that you can. Because if someone were to get your username and password for your Ugreen Link account and log into it, they would be able to access every file on your NAS remotely without you necessarily knowing. So this is a great way to do it. You can turn it on. It means I can access, I can go home right now. I'm at work. I could drive home. I could open up my computer. I could go to this web address, log in with my Ugreen account, and I would get access to this NAS. But you also are allowing anybody else to do that as well. This is a really cool feature, but it just needs to be said that you are opening your NAS up to remote access from you or potentially somebody else with your username and password. So pick a good password. Now, once this is enabled and you link it to your Ugreen Link account, what you're going to do is you'll see, I have mine blacked out, but you'll see there is a little web address link as the third line of text or second line of text right here. That is a link that you should bookmark, and it basically means wherever you are in the world, you could be in a different country, you can open up a web browser, type in that link into your URL or paste that into your little URL bar, hit enter, and you will be able to access what's on your NAS remotely from anywhere in the world. Now, it's not as clean as accessing it through Finder or Windows Explorer, so if you're somebody who likes, you're using your Lightroom catalog and you want to be able to access through Lightroom, there's little gotchas. It's only web browser access. But still, with that, you would be able to get to this layout remotely, and I would be able to open up File Manager. I could go into any of my different folders. I could grab a file, like say I want to grab that Ugreen Advanced Setting Word doc here. I'd be able to open it. If I wanted to grab a photo, I could go open that. I could download it. It gives you remote access to all of your files from anywhere in the world. So, very powerful tool, again, under Control Panel and Device Connection and remote access. Enable it at your own risk, but I will just want to point out that is a really cool tool that can give you remote access to your NAS. The next thing I want to look at is remote backups for your NAS, basically allowing your NAS to talk to another NAS and back up files to it. Now, I know Ugreen's also working with third-party cloud backup services. So as an example, you could have the NAS automatically back up to Microsoft OneDrive. I don't know if that's in development, I hope it is, or Backblaze or other kind of big cloud databases of files. But right now they have released the Ugreen to Ugreen NAS backup, and this is amazing. So here's the deal, you all. We talked about this in the last video, but redundancy on a NAS being able to handle a drive failure, is not technically a backup. And what I mean by that is, right now this NAS is configured with RAID 5. That means if I just pull a drive out randomly, like drive number 4, yank it out, and I throw it across the room, I won't lose any data. But if I pull 3 and 4 out, or 5 and 6, or 1 and 3, whatever 2 drives I pull out, I lose everything. That's the way RAID 5 works. The problem is, if there was to be an electrical surge, or there was going to be a flood, or something bad happened to this physical NAS, I would still lose everything, regardless of what version of RAID I happen to have configured. So a cloud backup, a remote backup, is a great way to ensure that your NAS, yes, has redundancy, but also is actually backed up to another location. Now the problem is, cloud backups sound great, thinking about Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, right? Whatever cloud backup you can think of. The problem is, it costs a lot of money to back up as much data as most people put on a NAS. You put 15 terabytes of data on a NAS, paying for 15 terabytes of data through a cloud service backup provider is going to cost hundreds of dollars a month. It's going to be very expensive. So for most folks, it's actually way more economical to buy a second NAS and have it live at a friend's house, have it live at work when your other one lives at home, have it live in a detached garage, wherever it lives, and have the 2 NASs back up to each other. That way you own both sides of the backup, you control it, and you can even usually get a less expensive, less nice NAS as your second backup one, because it's just a backup. You're not going to be working off of it every day. In order to configure this, I'm going to go into the App Center here, and one of the apps we're going to need to download is called Sync and Backup. So I'm going to go ahead and click Install. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. I'm going to put it on volume 1, and I'm going to go ahead and click Install. It's going to say, hey, you need the version manager too, so that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and confirm that, and we'll wait for this app to get installed. Once it installs, I went ahead and opened Sync and Backup here on my desktop, and this is what we can see. I'm going to go ahead and go to Sync. Sync is a 2-way synchronization between another NAS. And this is actually usually how I recommend most people set up a backup like this. This way, if you happen to put a file on the other NAS can actually back up to this one, and this one can back up to the other. It keeps the 2 NASs synchronized between one another. I'm going to go ahead and click New Sync Task. And I'm going to tell it that I want to back up to a remote Ugreen NAS, another NAS out there in the world. Now here we have a little choice. We can see that we can either type the IP address of the other NAS, that's the little address that we have up here in the address bar when we're accessing that other NAS, or we can type its Ugreen link ID. Well, let me go ahead and show you where I would find that. I'm going to go ahead and access my other NAS. Now I happen to know that its IP address is 10.0.11.13. Take that in. And here is my backup NAS, this is the other one, at a different IP address. If I go into the control panel on this NAS and I go to device connection and I go to remote access, you can see here is that Ugreen ID that we can grab, and we could take that Ugreen ID, copy it, go back to our other window, and we could paste it into that section. So there it is. We could also type the IP address. The only warning I want to give you guys is you can't use IP address if the 2 NASs are not part of the same network. So if you've got one NAS at your house and another NAS at a friend's house, you're going to have to use the Ugreen ID and not the IP. So I would recommend using the Ugreen ID anyway, as that's going to be a more reliable situation for both of you to use. Now do note that it does require you to install the Sync and Backup app on the remote Ugreen NAS as well. So I'm going to go to my backup NAS to keep track of where I am. You guys can see up here in my tabs, I've actually named one of them Main Ugreen 6800 and Backup Ugreen 4800. So I'm going to go ahead real quick, and on this backup NAS, I'm going to close it. I'm going to go into my App Center, and I'm going to download that same Sync and Backup utility. Now that this is installed, I'm gonna pop back to my main NAS. Next thing you're gonna wanna do is type in your username and password. Note, this is the username and password of the remote backup NAS that you are backing up to, the administrator username and administrator password. So this doesn't have anything to do with your Ugreen account, like if you have like a Ugreen Cloud Access account, doesn't have anything to do with that. It's actually, if I was accessing my backup NAS over here, it's the administrator username and password that I would be using to access that NAS. I'm gonna go ahead and also turn on transmission encryption so that data is encrypted across the pathway, and I'm gonna click confirm. Okay. Now it's asking me what folder I want to sync to which folder. Now here we have some different options as well. This is basically saying the remote path is where do we want to send the data to? What folder do we want to send it to? And we can actually see I don't really have any folders set up on that other NAS. So one thing I'd want to do is go to my backup NAS here, go into File Manager, and I would want to create a new shared folder that I want to send the backup from the main NAS to. So I'm gonna call this backup of main NAS. Storage locations volume 1, that looks great. I'm gonna go ahead and create that. This is on the backup NAS that I'm creating this. And there it is. I'm gonna go back to my main NAS. I'm gonna go ahead and refresh this so it updates. And I'm gonna select the backup of main NAS as my destination. So that's my remote path. The local path is what folder I wanna back up on the NAS that I'm accessing. What am I looking to back up? And I'm gonna go ahead and select that, and I'm gonna select my files as the path that I would like to back up. So real simple, what do you wanna back up? Where do you want it to go? Local path is what you wanna back up. Remote path is where you want it to go. The next thing is sync direction. Two-way sync is kind of as I described it earlier. If someone puts a file on the backup NAS, it's gonna move it over to this or copy it over to this NAS. If I put something on this NAS, it's gonna copy it over to the backup NAS. The other thing you could do is just say upload local data to remote only. If you're gonna be using just your main NAS as your main NAS and the other one is just a backup, I would recommend that option there. In advanced settings, it looks like we can say filter some things, we can have it ignore some certain files, things like that. I'm just gonna say upload local data to remote only. Go ahead and click next. Here we can give it a sync policy. Real time means as soon as a new file is on this main NAS, it should send it over to the backup. Manual means only when you click the sync now button, and then you could also schedule a sync time. Say a time when you're not using the internet and you want all this traffic to be going through your network. I'm gonna go ahead and just say real time sync, click on next. And it's gonna give me a name here. I'm just gonna call this main NAS to backup NAS. Main NAS to backup, and confirm. All right, and just like that, it is synchronized and connected. Now, I do want to say a couple things. I am going to go ahead and test this. So let me go ahead. I already have that Finder window open here with my NAS already connected. I'm going to go ahead and throw a file into my files. So let me make a new Finder window here and let's drag the little Word document for this video into my files. So there we go, I just put it on my NAS. So now that Word doc has been applied over to the NAS. And then I'm gonna go to my backup NAS and see if it backed up or not. So let's pop into backup of main NAS, and hey, there it is right there. That Word doc has already copied over to the backup. So I just wanna kind of hammer this home. This is pretty freaking cool. It basically means that when you put stuff on your NAS now, it has immediate drive redundancy. So it's on multiple drives inside the enclosure. One drive can fail or two drives can fail, and you don't lose anything. On top of that, depending on your internet connection speed and your network connection speed, as soon as I put something on this main NAS, it also starts copying it to the backup NAS. So if something happened to this box, all of your data is safe. Now I know we have a lot of photographers, videographers in our YouTube audience, and I just wanna really hammer home the amazing simplicity that this offers you. If you've been watching our videos on backing up and using Carbon Copy Cloner and all the things you have to do to keep a redundant backed up workflow, NASes configured properly remove all of that. You don't have to hit a button. You don't have to do anything. You put a file on it, it's there, happy day, and then it automatically sends it over to another NAS if you set it up properly, and you don't have to worry about the process. It's very, very cool. Now, I do want to point out, if your second NAS lives in a separate network, different house, different location, whatever it is, the transfer speed between the two NASs is highly dependent on the internet connection at your main NAS location and the internet connection at your backup NAS location. So if you are trying to do true like remote NAS backup from one house to another, you're gonna want pretty speedy internet between the two places. My recommendation is always to, instead of doing that, the best thing to do is have a detached garage, have another building, have whatever you have, even in a different room in your apartment complex, whatever it is, set up two NASs, have them back up to one another. And that way, if something happens to the enclosure or whatever it is, you have a second fully safe backed up system. Obviously, a cloud backup can be a good option as well, but it's expensive and it's a little bit too pricey for many people. Well, everybody, I hope you found this video useful. We covered a lot of ground and a lot of more advanced setup options for these NASs. I do want to get a little bit into the feature set of this NAS if you are interested in buying one of these things. Like I said, this is a sponsored video, so I'm not going to be doing a review, but I do want to say this thing is an absolute monster. This is the DXP6800 Pro. It has a 10-core CPU, dual 10 gigabit ports like we talked about for link aggregation. It's got 8 gigs of RAM that you can expand up to 64 gigs of RAM. It's got Thunderbolt ports. It's just got a ton of stuff. 6 bays. There's a ton of storage we can pack into it. Pretty amazing thing. I also want to remind you guys that if you do want to buy one of these, there is a link down in the description, and if you're buying it in the next week or so, you can save 35% off of the standard price. Finally, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. I'd love to answer them. If you have any other features that you'd like me to focus on in a future video, let me know that as well. Hit subscribe to stay up to date with future videos. For those of you that this is your first RMSP video, we make videos on photo and video related topics every single week, so follow along. I'd love you to drop a like down below if you would, and I hope to catch you in a future video. Thanks, everybody.